Yeah, absolutely. Let's take one. You get a quick one. Thank you. Thanks. Good luck, bro. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That's all right. Yes, yeah.
My daughter Mercy. Do you mind doing a photo?
That's a Mercy.
Here we go.
Nice to
We will see you at your 10 o'clock in Detroit.
Oh, great.
So we're getting an early start. Welcome
Wonderful.
to Michigan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us out, Melissa. Thank you for having us out. Really? Oh my gosh. We're gonna be
All right, folks, here he is. We gotta give a real Macomb County welcome. Come on, let's show. Are we gonna retake the country? Good morning. Buenos dias. Pretty good. So nice to be with you. This is the 5th day of our campaign to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. It's our first stop in the great, important state of Michigan. And the first place we're coming to is Macomb County, and to Dan's hometown heroes. Dan, thank you for opening up your restaurant to all of us. He's letting people in the door. Dan, thank you also for your service to our country, for the sacrifices you were willing to make for all of us, and for your commitment to our democracy. One of the things that Dan said is, I want you and I want anyone from either side of the aisle to be able to come here and meet the people that I serve every day in this restaurant and talk about their vision for this community, for this state, for this country. That is democracy at our absolute best. When we take no one for granted, write nobody off, welcome everybody in from any point of view. The differences of geography, or party, or race, or faith, or how many generations you can count your family in American, or whether they just got here yesterday, none of that stuff matters right now, as much as the fact that before we are Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans and we are human beings. And we're going to treat each other accordingly. I don't know if this microphone is loud enough or if I should just project from, can you all hear? You all can hear, okay. I was in the U.S. House of Representatives for 6 years. Every single one of those years, I was in the minority. Now, I could come back to my community of El Paso, Texas. Woo! I want to thank all 2 of you from El Paso, Texas. University of Texas at El Paso, go Miners, thank you for meeting us when we came in. I could come back to my hometown and I could explain to my constituents with whom I held a town hall meeting every single month, no exceptions, all comers welcomed, no holds barred. I could say, listen, you explained to me that veterans in this community are unable to get in and see a mental health care provider. In fact, we ranked dead last in the United States for access to a mental health care provider for those veterans who literally put their lives on the line for this country, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in so many of the wars that we are still fighting right now at this moment. Nationally, we're losing 20 veterans a day, every single day, by their own hand. 16 of those 20 unable or for whatever reason unwilling to go to the VA and see that provider who could help treat their post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, the signature wounds and conditions of war and combat and service to our country. Say, listen, I wrote the perfect legislation to try to address this, but those darn Republicans, they don't like our veterans as much. They won't work with me. I can't get it done until we get into the majority. I came back with that kind of nonsense. My constituents would have called BS. They would have voted me out of office, and I would have deserved it. Instead, we found those Republican colleagues with whom we could form the common ground, which meant we had to compromise a little bit, find some consensus, and do something far better than what we had today. In other words, not allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. And the bill that we wrote with Mike Kaufman, Republican of Colorado, that opened up mental health care for veterans who have what is known as an other than honorable discharge, who are taking their lives at twice the rate as the general veterans community, passed the House of Representatives 435-0. It passed the Senate, and it was signed into law by a president with whom I agree on almost nothing. But we were able to work together to improve access, improve outcomes, and save lives for those who had done so much for this country. That's the way in which I've served. That's the way in which we are campaigning right now. You cannot be too red or too blue, too rural or too urban, too close or too far from the United States-Mexico border for me to show up, listen to you, try to see things from your perspective, and bring this deeply divided, highly polarized country together around the big challenges before us. The work to be there for those veterans, ensure their health care, their access to a post-9/11 GI Bill, a roof over their heads when there are far too many veterans who are homeless today. That work still continues, and it will require all of us. Those service members who tonight, where it is already tonight in Afghanistan, almost 19 years and counting. In Iraq, 27 years and counting. Somalia, Yemen, Libya, wars all over the world where we ask our fellow Americans to put their lives on the line, to potentially lose their lives, to take the lives of others in your name and in mine. We want to have their back. We should understand why we fight these wars, how we define victory, what the strategy is to achieve it, what we are willing to spend, measured in the trillions of dollars and the thousands of American lives to achieve it. Or we should have leadership that understands that our foreign policy cannot solely be purchased through military involvement. We cannot ask 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds to carry that burden on their back for all of us. We can decide that we will end these wars and bring those service members back home to their communities, guaranteeing their success and the success of their communities. We can ensure that in the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most technologically advanced country on the planet, that the millions of our fellow Americans who cannot see a doctor, who cannot afford their prescriptions, who cannot take their child to a therapist, that we make the investment in them, that we choose them over the corporations and the special interests and the inaction that has defined us on the issue of health care thus far. We decide that our goal is nothing less than guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care for every single American. And in an economy that works too well for some. Imagine having an extra few millions of dollars that you can use to game the college admissions system to get your kid into USC or wherever you want to send them. And then acknowledge that there are millions of families that can't put together a few $100s as a down payment on the first semester in a community college or a public serving 4-year university. One of the greatest progressives in a progressive tradition, Theodore Roosevelt, a Republican more than 100 years ago, says you will not have anything close to political democracy, where all of us are reflected and represented in this country's system of government, until you have something approaching economic democracy. The income and wealth inequality in this country is obscene. It's unparalleled in our lifetimes. You have to go back to the last Gilded Age to see anything close to that. When you have school teachers in this country, educators, the cafeteria workers, the therapists, the librarians, the counselors, everyone who ensures that our kids are going to do better and are prepared for their lives when they reach adulthood, and they're working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, on top of the fact that out of their own pocket, they're pulling out hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars, not just to decorate the classroom at their own expense, not just to buy supplies for the kid who shows up without them, but to buy that hot meal, that little girl who's on the free and reduced breakfast and lunch program but has no dinner to come home to, that little boy who's shown up in the same t-shirt, the same pair of jeans, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By Thursday, that teacher has bought that child a new set of clothes because he or she understands that that kid needs the dignity and self-respect to be able to learn just like every other kid. Who are we to squander the talent, the drive, the calling of these public school educators by paying them something less than a living wage, by making it harder for the next generation of educators to step up? What if we decided we were going to make an investment in public education, pre-K through 12? We're going to ensure that you can go to college and not take on debt that has accumulated to the tune of $1.5 trillion so far. And then we don't just think about and talk about college readiness, we also think about and talk about and act on career readiness. Some of these great public schools that I'm talking about are ensuring that those 18-year-olds who graduate with a diploma are also picking up an associate's degree, have certifications as an electrician or a welder or a remote FAA pilot to fly the drones and do the inspections on the wind turbines that we have all over my home state of Texas. High wage, high skill, high value jobs. What if we did a better job of partnering with unions so that when you transition from high school and transition into the country, or when you come home, your service to this country, having been as essential as a human being can be in that military unit, where everything that you do will determine the fate not just of yourself, but every woman and man in that unit. What if we were more willing to invest in your successful transition? Yes, in a post 9/11 GI Bill for everyone that lasts for as long as you live, but also making sure that we're connecting you not just with education, but with careers. Those unions that come up with ideas like helmets to hard hats, who want to make sure that that returning service member has dignity and function and purpose in their lives, those are our leaders on making sure this economy truly works for everyone. Lastly, if you still listen to the scientists, and I do, you may find it ridiculous that 300 years after the Enlightenment, there's still people taking to the street with banners and placards and posters that say science. Who would have thought that we would have had to have marched for that and reaffirmed our belief in facts and truth and science? But we do. We have a president who denies that the climate is changing, that it is caused by our own excesses, emissions, and inaction, that it has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since the year 1980, and that if it warms another degree Celsius in our future, we will be more screwed than we are today. And importantly, this planet, many cities on it, will be literally unlivable for our kids, for their kids, and for the generations that follow. Do not turn your back on those wildfires in California, those floods in southeast Texas. 58 inches of rain fell from the sky in 2017, the landfall record for as long as we have been keeping them. And that was the third 500-year flood in Houston in just 5 years. The droughts that we see in North Texas and in the Panhandle, those scientists tell us that those fires, those floods, those droughts are in part caused by human-made climate change. They will become more profound, more frequent, and more devastating. They will cost more life, and they will change this planet irrevocably. If you think 400,000 apprehensions on the southern border with Mexico is a problem, wait until some countries in the Western Hemisphere are no longer inhabitable by human beings. The crisis in refugee flows, in wars for scarce resources, you do not want to consign your kids to that fate. The scientists also tell us we have 12 years within which to act. And in that time left to us, today included, we cannot be found wanting. But for us to meet any of those challenges, our economy, our healthcare system, our public education system, and meeting the greatest existential challenge of them all, we have to bring forward the greatest mechanism for action humankind has ever invented, and that is democracy. But right now, in this country, this democracy, our institutions, have become so corrupted and so captured by corporations and special interests, a concentration of wealth and power and privilege that works at such odds to our common interests, our common goals, and the common cause of our fellow Americans. We must get this democracy back. We must make sure that it's working for all of us. This campaign will take not a single dime from a single political action committee, special lobbyists, all people, all the time, in every state. We will write no one off. We will take no one for granted. We will show up everywhere. We will not allow the differences between us to define us or divide us or keep us from the great work before us. Are you with me on this? What I love being with you, looking forward to answering your questions, hearing what's on your mind, and so grateful to be with you in Macomb County today. Thank you for having us out. Thank you. Really appreciate it. So Cynthia right here is going to take the microphone. If you have a question, she's going to try to get it to you so everyone can hear you as well. We'll begin the conversation, and we'll see how many people we can get involved. Yeah.
My name is Dominique. I'm from about an hour away in a city called Flint. We are 5 years now without clean drinking water, and now we're hearing across the state there's PFAS in our waterways. What are you doing, or what will you do to help make sure that cities across the country have clean drinking water and our waterways stay protected?
Dominique, thank you for being here. Thank you for making the drive down from Flint. Thank you for raising what is one of the most important questions. I mentioned climate change. I mentioned that 1 degree Celsius. I mentioned the urgency of the 12 years in which we have to act. You brought it all home to a local level. Beyond the wildfires, the floods, and the droughts, let's acknowledge that the brunt of pollution and inaction and a lack of investment in our infrastructure has been borne by some communities more than others. And if we look across the United States, typically it is communities of color. So one of the reasons that I like the way the Green New Deal has been laid out, the framework for that incredibly ambitious proposal, it does not attempt to disengage our action on climate with the need to rebuild this economy so that it works for everyone, with acknowledging that some communities have been already harmed in this process and should be prioritized for the investment. So whether you live in Flint, whether you live in Warren, whether you live in El Paso, Texas, you should be able to count on the water that you drink, the air that you breathe, the soil into which you plant, the food that will grow, the fiber that will literally clothe us going forward. We are missing that from so many communities in this country. Campaigning across Texas, I found that there are 48 water systems just in my home state where it is not safe to drink the water. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in ourselves, in our communities. But not only is that the right thing to do if we're thinking about the moral imperative, if we think about our own economic self-interest and well-being, when people are well enough to be able to live to their full potential, when there's no question about the water that you drink, your community can hold on to and attract the young people who will define its future going forward. So I want to make sure that we are focused on those big goals, those generational goals of climate change. I also want to make sure that in the immediate term, we fix some of these problems and we stop digging the hole, especially in an administration whose director of the EPA does not believe in some of the science and facts that I just described, has not shown the urgency around communities like Flint and those in Texas that I just referred to. So thank you for raising the issue of water. Can't think of anything more important. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name's Cooper. I'm from Lake Orion. I wanted to know, how will you fix the government and, like, I don't want it to keep, like, having shutdowns, like the big one, like Christmas time. Because I know federal workers are working really hard for their jobs, and, like, I don't want them to have shutdowns.
Let's hear it for Cooper. I love that Cooper is not asking for himself, he's asking about others. He's asking about federal employees who take the worst hit on any of these government shutdowns. In my hometown, Cooper, of El Paso, we have the fifth highest concentration of federal workers. If you think about all those Border Patrol agents, those women and men who help to keep our country safe, customs officers at our ports of entry who facilitate trade and travel, those prison officers at La Tuna Prison in the northwest part of my old congressional district, the people who deliver the mail, those folks who take care of the veterans at the VA or at the military hospital in El Paso, William Beaumont Army Medical Center, all of them are federal employees. And when you say fix our government, I want us to think about what that means in a democracy. If the people are the government, and the government is the people, then this solution is on all of us. It cannot be one person. Couldn't be even one president. No matter how strong, no matter how resourceful, no matter how experienced she or he may be, it's going to take a country. And that's the way that our system of government was set up. But we've got to fix this democracy, which is not working right now, which is not responding to you, which helps to explain the otherwise inexplicable. Why would we shut this government down time and time again? Why would we not ensure that kids like you can get the health care that they need to be well enough to learn the next day? Why in the world would we take a kid, your age, a little bit younger, a little bit older, who's traveled 2,000 miles, leaving the deadliest countries in this hemisphere, maybe the planet, maybe showing up with his mom, maybe not. Put that kid in a cage, take his mother, if he showed up with a mother, and deport her back to the very country she fled, having risked her life for this kid. Now, some people want to blame that on one person. And by the same token, if I say no one person can fix all these challenges or be up to every test that we face, we cannot also just blame one person for the state of our government, the shutdowns or the family separations to which I refer. That's on all of us, every single one of us, as long as we are a democracy. But you know what? I think you and I and everybody here takes that seriously. We're going to make sure that we change our government that reflects our priorities, that we're good to one another, and that we reflect the genius and the ambition and the aspirations that we all have to be there for one another and for the generations like yours that follow us. So thank you for asking the question. Really appreciate it. Good job.
What's up, Beto?
I see that descendant shirt.
Okay, so 2 questions. All right. Question number 1, a question that I'm asking to every candidate I get a chance to. Who is the greatest punk band of all time? My second question, the actual question, I fall in line with what is described as the unskilled white male worker, a collection of people who overwhelmingly did not vote for the right guys in the 2016 election. So how can we take our ideals that include many things, including inclusion of people of other races, other sexual orientations, other beliefs in God, and show them that our ideas are the right way, because unfortunately that's a big group of people that we have to try and win back in 2020.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Both tough questions. You know, the Clash, when someone you know, as an 8th grader at El Paso High School, changed my life. But there is such an embarrassment of riches when it comes to music from this country. I think of the Bad Brains from Washington, D.C., and a lot of bands that I still listen to today. So thanks for asking. Including the Descendants, whose shirt you're wearing right now. You know, this president has been very successful at exacerbating the divisions and the differences to which you just alluded. He wants to pit us against each other. It's the divide and conquer approach that is as old as politics or government or warfare or, frankly, human civilization and existence. And we can either succumb to that and, return in kind, or we can transcend that and be above that and care less. And we say in El Paso, no me importa. Whether you're Republican or you're Democrat, whether you are black or white, whether you are here in your 7th generation in your family or you just got here yesterday. But importantly, we can also not turn our backs on or ignore how we got here. And I think this conversation about confronting the hard truths of slavery and segregation and suppression, the way that wealth was built in this country literally by people in bondage who can enjoy none of the fruits of the wealth that they created. How there are half-lives of slavery, but also the policies that followed. People kept down. In Texas, my state ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy any less than do the people of Michigan, but because some people, based on the color of their skin, were literally drawn out of a congressional district, drawn out of a reason to vote, drawn out of their democracy. Do not take my word for it. In 2017, 4 times alone, the courts found that to be the case. I was in Orange, Texas, in the southeast part of the state campaigning, and someone raised their hand and said, what are you going to do about the Confederate monument? Now, there was not a county, with almost no exception, where I didn't see a Confederate monument in a place of honor, right? What the hell does that do to your head as a young man or a young girl in that state, in that community? Who does that say who it is we revere, and who is important and who is not important? So I said, look, I think those Confederate monuments should come down, put them in a museum to have some context. Maybe we can learn from our history. And I was interrupted before I could finish the question. She said, no, not the Confederate monuments that are already up, the ones that they're building. They're building one in Orange, Texas right now. You gotta be kidding me. If we are unwilling to confront that, we're gonna keep making the same mistake under different guise, in different terms, and we're never going to resolve some of those underlying challenges, some of those systemic faults that keep some people down and not able to go ahead. Now, to the spirit of your question, we could then turn and pit some people against others based on their race and their history and what their ancestors did to somebody else's ancestors. Or we can decide that we are going to work together to address and redress those ills. And I think that's who we are when we are at our absolute best. And it does not have to come at the cost of some people in this country not being able to advance or get ahead. That's what current leadership would like to have you believe. They want you back in your corners, in your tribes, not willing to listen to or be there with others with whom you may not agree on every single issue. I think we are capable of having this very difficult conversation. I think we can talk about an economy that includes everyone, regardless of your race, but describes how some people of some races have literally been written out by law from success in this economy, from building wealth, from having opportunities in education and in life and participating in our democracy. It's the only way we're going to make it better. And last point, ask somebody who is much smarter than I am on these issues. Someone who is very involved in building the memorial for peace and justice in Montgomery, Alabama. And I said, talk to me about reparations. And he said, at the root of that word is repair. And in order to repair, we just have to have the truth and the facts. And Beto, sometimes, and I think he was talking about some things that I've said, you talk about civil rights as this triumphant struggle. You talk about John Lewis across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the Freedom Riders on those Greyhound buses in the Deep South, Martin Luther King. You know, all that is part of the story, but you also have to talk about the things that we don't want to talk about in this country. Those three words that I mentioned at the outset of my answer. So, I know I gave you more than you asked for in response to your question, but it was a serious question. I wanted to give it a serious answer, and I appreciate you raising it. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Pavelus, inchbasas, that in Armenian is good morning, how are you? My name is Karen, and from East Point, my grandmother was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. So I have two questions for you. Number one, speaking of the Armenian genocide, to this day, the United States government still does not hold Turkey accountable for the Armenian genocide, where 1.5 million out of 2 billion Armenians were massacred. There are so many other countries that have acknowledged that. My grandmother was 10. She lost her entire family. As a 10-year-old little girl, she never, ever should have bore witness to all those horrible atrocities. She had PTSD long before that was ever termed. So that's the one question I have for you. How would you work with our government to push for the recognition on behalf of the United States government to hold Turkey accountable? Because even though it's not their current government, it was the Ottoman Empire. And the Germans long ago gave a public apology to the Jewish community and said, even though we weren't responsible for the Holocaust, we are sorry. And it was Hitler who said to everyone who told him, you cannot go through with this plan to exterminate 6 million Jews. His response to them, really, after all, who remembers the poor Armenians? My second question is in regards to the issues we're having, horrible negative issues we're having with our environment and climate change. And I want to address what is very uncomfortable. A lot of people say, no, that's too upsetting to look at, it's too upsetting to hear, and that is all the cruelty that is inflicted on the animals. I am working on getting my license to practice law. I graduated law school back in September 2017. My sole reason for going to law school was for the animals. I have been an animal rights activist and a vegetarian for over 25 years. I went vegan in 2012. So my question is how can you work with the government? Because right now what's happening is there is no accountability in these slaughterhouses. And I can tell you, people think it's funny and they make jokes about bacon. I would say to those people who think it's funny, go spend a day in a slaughterhouse and watch how horribly these animals are beaten to death. Their heads are slammed into the ground, against the walls. They're dying without any pain control whatsoever. And this is something that we need to acknowledge, all this cruelty going on. These factory farms are responsible for what's going on with all the horrible climate change. It's polluting the waters, it's polluting the air. There are people who have had their homes long before those factory farms showed up. They can't open their windows, they can't drink the water because liquid manure comes out. And there's so much animal cruelty that it is obscene. What can you do? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the two questions. On the answer to the first question, we absolutely have to have standards for the humane treatment of animals, including the animals that we raise for protein and for consumption. And then those standards have to be enforced. And I think you're making the point that that isn't the case in regards to both, to the standard and to the enforcement of current standards that we have. So we absolutely need to do a better job. In your very thoughtful question about the Armenian massacre, genocide, this country was founded on the premise that we are all created equal. And I mentioned our form of government, which is really unique in the world and in world history. 243 some odd years and counting, and it still works. Nothing guarantees us a 244th or 245th, but we're all doing our part. And we like to hold ourselves out as an example to other countries, and that we prioritize and value human rights, regardless of who that human being is and where they live. And yet sometimes those become values of convenience that we are able to look away from when we're looking at our short-term self-interest, whether that is with a military ally, whether that is Turkey, whether that is Egypt with al-Sisi, whether it is Saudi Arabia and their indiscriminate bombing campaign in Yemen, to whom we are a party as we assist that government in massacring people in their neighboring country, one of the most desperate places on the planet. So if we really hold these truths and we really mean them, then we've got to be consistent in how we talk about it and how we call it out. But I would come back, and so point taken from your question, but I would come back to my response to the last question. We got to do all that around the world, but we also have to do that at home. And we've absolutely failed to do that at home. I mean, the accounting for those who can trace their family tree back 10,000 years in this country, or lands that were taken from them, those who literally built this country in bondage, and who were kept down forever afterwards. There's 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America, and that didn't happen by accident, it happened by design. And so I want to make sure that we are not holier than thou with the rest of the world without confronting our own failings here. It doesn't mean that we have to be sorry for ourselves or we have to think less of America. In fact, I think more of us if we have the strength to confront that and have those conversations. It's a test for us. Are we up to this moment? Can we do this? And then if we do, I think the moral clarity with which we speak around the world becomes that much stronger on the issue that you raised and any other issues that come up. Thanks for the question.
These are our last two questions.
Hi, my name's Karam, and I'm a first-generation Syrian-American student. And I wanted to ask, how will you, as president, make safe homes and safe learning environments for these families who fled from countries like Syria and Iraq?
And to expand on this, hi, my name is Mia. I'm a freshman at Troy High School, and both Karam and I can attest that we've grown up in a world surrounded by tragedies like Parkland and Sandy Hook, and I was wondering what you would do in office to help us be safe at school.
Two great questions. First, on the first question, Karam, I believe we have the lowest refugee resettlement numbers, maybe in my lifetime, but in a very long time, at the precise moment that we have some of the world's greatest crises and out-migration from places like Syria, from the Northern Triangle of Central America, and other places in between. And it's hard for me to understand how the wealthiest country in the world, a country that is comprised of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants, among others, and the very foundation of our strength and our success. And as a resident of El Paso, Texas, where more than a quarter of those with whom I live were born somewhere else, and is one of the safest cities in the United States of America, I would argue our very security is premised on those immigrants and refugees who find a home in this country. So in other words, lest we think we're just doing something good for that refugee, that immigrant, that asylum seeker from Guatemala, know this, and I think you do, that we are the ultimate beneficiary of what they bring here. Their genius, the kids that they raise, what they contribute, that all accrues to our benefit here in the United States, not to some other country. That is our story millions, hundreds of millions of times over, and we lose sight of that story at our peril. So a couple of things. One, let's make sure that we lift the cap that we have on the number of refugees that we resettle in this country. Two, let's make sure that we invest in their success, because again, it follows that it is our success if they're able to find purpose and function in their communities and in this country that they were called to, whose success they want to contribute to. Let's remember that. But let's also go back to how these problems got started. And I will be brief, but look, when you invade the country of Iraq, when you completely destabilize that part of the Middle East, when you embolden Iran by extension, because the counterweight to Iran is now gone, when you have some of the worst droughts in recorded history, and Syria has some recorded history in that country, forcing people to flee from the countryside, concentrate in the cities, providing additional tinder to the conflagration that would erupt in that country. One of the worst humanitarian crises we have seen since World War II. That stuff didn't just happen of its own accord, right? So climate change, our wars of intervention in the Middle East, that helps to produce some of this crisis in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America. When you overthrow the democratically elected government of Jacob Arbenz Guzman in the 1950s in Guatemala, when you involve this country in the civil wars in Nicaragua and El Salvador, when you help to destabilize Honduras, those problems do not just stay in those countries. When you, the United States of America, are 4% of the globe's population, but 25% of its consumption of illegal drugs, those drugs have to be produced and have to be transited through somewhere, hollowing out the institutions of police, judiciary, freedom of the press, and civil society that allows people to be able to count on their government to protect their kids. If it were the only choice left to me, as it is to them, I'd pack up and walk 2,000 miles. I'd sit atop a train known as the Beast or La Bestia that travels the length of Mexico with my little kiddos to save their lives. So let's understand what's going on right now and why it is happening and what we can do about it, both in long term, in the causes that we can stop producing, and also in the benefit that we are going to enjoy when we do the right thing. The other question, and very quickly, on school shootings and just firearm deaths in this country in general. Many responsible gun owners in this room. I come from a state of responsible gun owners in Texas for hunting, for self-defense, for sport, for collection. And we take that responsibility very seriously. We feel accountable for the firearms that we own. We should also take very seriously that in this country we will lose 30,000 plus of our fellow Americans, of our fellow human beings, of lives, which is a number unlike any other in the world. No other modern country sees this level of death. Now, either there is something inherently wrong with us that would produce this kind of suffering, or this is a human-caused problem with a human-caused solution. And let me offer two. One, universal background checks without exception. Everyone in the house goes through the background check. Second, and this may not get as strong an applause. It's a little more contentious. And listen, if you disagree with me on this, just know I respect your opinion. People of reasonable minds and great character can come down on either side of this issue. I just happen to believe that weapons which were designed and engineered and sold to the United States military for the express purpose of killing people as effectively, as efficiently, and as great a number as possible have no business being sold in our community. To my friends who own an AR-15 or some variant of a weapon of war, keep it. I don't want to take it from you. I don't want our government to take it from you. Continue to use it responsibly and safely. I just don't think that we should be selling more into our community. So thank you all for the questions. Thank you for having us out. We will see you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Hey, Bradley, I'm Beto. Nice to meet you. Huge honor that you're here. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's awesome.
Can you take one picture shaking?